Talking about iOS development with UIKit. Now in 2019, we know iOS development and user interfaces could be created two ways in iOS. One way is UIKit, and the other way, the new way, is SwiftUI. So here we're learning iOS development using UIKit, which we got introduced to yesterday. We saw a varied amount of UI elements yesterday. We saw UI label, we saw UI button, right? We're able to use those elements to create two apps, right? We've created two apps so far. The first app was the My First app. The second app we created is the lab. We're creating the Monty, 3-card Monty app, right? Great. So today, we'll start taking a look at architecture, because leaving command line, leaving read line, leaving repeat while, now we enter a new world where we have a lot of moving parts, right? A lot of moving parts is a lot of code. Where do we put that code? How do we organize our code, right? So that's today's topic and how we could go about doing that. We also spoke about object-oriented programming at the end of Unit 1. Anybody care to share what object-oriented programming is? Object-oriented programming, what is object-oriented programming? Or what do we think it is? Yes, Cassandra. Okay, very good. So Cassandra is saying, very good, Cassandra. So Cassandra is saying that we're using complex types like enum, structs, classes to encapsulate real objects, right? We had a blackjack game that we created using object-oriented programming. We were able to encapsulate what a blackjack game is through object-oriented programming, right? Using encapsulation, using properties, using methods, we were able to create our app using object-oriented principles. So to work on that foundation, we delve into app architecture. The app architecture that we use in iOS is known as MVC. M stands for model, the model of the program. The model meaning the data, right? What does the data look like? In our blackjack, the data would be what? What would the data be? What would the data be for our blackjack game? What would the data be? What was it? Which class or struct was the data for our blackjack? The card, right? According to Luba, it's the card. So that card struct was our data, right? We got the cards from it. We got the cards array. So that's the model. If we were to use that same app, which we can, which we might at some point, we could use that same card. That same card we used in the command line app, we could take it without changing anything, bring it into an iOS app, and have it at our disposal. That would be the model of our application. Every app needs some sort of data. We spoke about that. Without data, you don't have an app. You have a blank screen. Even that blank screen is some sort of data, right? There's something there, right? So every app has data. You need to start thinking, what is the data of my app? Where does my app begin? Without that data, it doesn't work, right? So we need to get some sort of data flow into our app. So about 30 years ago, MVC started, and MVC has been around for a long time. The MVC architecture says, I have data, I call it my model. That's the model of my app. I have Instagram, I have friends, I have photos. All that makes up the data for my application. One day, if you wake up, you have no friends in your Instagram. That's going to be a bit weird, right? How do you interact, right? Where's the data? Where's my friends, right? I'm kind of sad now, right? So Instagram has many data points, many models moving around that app. It's a big app, right? Even your likes will be data. How many likes do I have, right? So all that is data. So that's the model, the heart of your app, that data there. The data-driven app, right? Without data, those big companies wouldn't be around, right? They buy and sell user data. It's a thing. That's why they're big as they're big. Google has data. Search data. What do you search for? Amazon, right? What are you searching for? What do your search queries look like, right? So here, that's the model. The M in MVC stands for model. Model is the data of my application. In Blackjack, that was our card. Yesterday, we got introduced to iOS development using Storyboard. In our Storyboard file, we had a view. We had a view controller scene in there. We had a view. It was a white view. It began with a white view. That view that we see is the view the user sees. When we launch our app, the user sees the white screen. So we added more elements to that white screen. All that is what the user sees. If the user sees it, it's a view. Everybody with me? Right? The user sees it, they're able to interact with it. That is the view of the app. That's the V in MVC. So far, so good? So we spoke about model is data. We spoke about view as what the user sees. Right? I get up, I look at my feed, I see photos, I see likes, I see everything. That's the view. Somebody needs to connect the view on the data. Right? How do I get how many likes I want? Right? When I click on a button, where does that go? How does it update the model? When I click on that button to say I like something, how does that get updated? Who's the one in charge of keeping everything connected and talking to each other? That there is the controller. The controller is the glue between the M and the V. We saw a controller yesterday. We saw a controller today, right? Yesterday, we created a view. We added a button to the view, and we connected that view to the controller, to the view controller. When you click on that action, the controller says, view, update yourself, right? So the controller is the glue between that model and the view. We haven't actually seen a model with our iOS development. Today we'll see a model, what that looks like. But the controller is the glue, the one talking between the M and the V, right? So that's MVC there, model, view, controller. And again, it's been around for 30 years. It's proven. Yes, as we start delving deeper into iOS development, we'll come across different architectures. We'll come across MVVM. We'll come across Viper. And every weekend, it's almost like there's a new architecture around, right? But do not lose track of fundamental principles. No matter what architecture you use, if you do not separate concerns, your code will be messy anyway, no matter what architecture you go to. MVC gets a bad rap because what happens, everybody or developers tends to put all code that they could possibly put in the controller because it's just easy to get to it. Why should I create something? Why should I encapsulate something? Why should I be using a function to get to a property? Just put everything in one file. Boom, I'm done, right? Very similar to like a command line app. Everything is in one file. Easy to get to things, but also hard to test. Hard to test, hard to change versions, hard to manipulate. Because everything is in one file. You take one thing out, the whole thing is broken. But in our blackjack game, you could take the card out and add something else. That gives an array of some sort of card. Maybe it's a different card game. So to be able to encapsulate your project using MVC or any other architecture is fundamental. Essential to having an app that you could work on, your team could work on, that you're happy to code on. Nobody wants to work on an app that's like spaghetti code all around the place. It's like, hey, what is this doing? Why is it there? Why do I have a function that does nothing with what the description says? All that comes into thought and designing, thought processes, right? But MVC is what we use here, right? In iOS core here at Pursuit, that's what we use. MVC. As we get further and further into our job search, we might come across different architectures. We may even show a different architecture here. But fundamentally, you need to know MVC and need to be able to own it, need to be able to master it, need to be able to explain it before you go elsewhere looking at other architectures. Because the architecture is not the thing that saves you. It's you saving yourself from yourself, if you know what we're saying here. Right? So we'll build an app today using MVC. The app will be called Recipe or Recipes. Right? So that's MVC. That's an overview of MVC. Controller, glue between model and view. We've seen a view. We've seen a controller. Today we'll see a model. We've seen a model already in Unit 1, but today we'll add everything together in a project. Great. So with that said, let's create a new Xcode project. It's a single view application. It's called Recipes. So let's go to Xcode and create a new Xcode project. It's a single view application. It's an iOS application. We're calling it Recipes. All our boxes are unchecked. We'll click Next. For repositories, that's also unchecked. What's that? Do not put it in a folder. In that saving part, save it somewhere that doesn't have a repository already. Okay, so you could push it later, get more experience there. So for now, we click on Create. Great. And this is our application. This is the boilerplate application that we get. And yesterday we spoke about the app delegate. Well, we haven't gotten into the app delegate, but that's the files that we have by default. So far, so good. Great. So first, let's go to the main storyboard. Navigate to the main storyboard. Click on main storyboard. So this is our main storyboard. This is the view we have. We have one view. So far, so good. One view. This is our view. It's a class UI view, right? The background is white. But now we need to get to the object library to build out our UI. Our UI for our recipes app will have a UI image. We haven't seen UI image. We've seen images, but we haven't seen the UI image element. So we'll drag a UI image. We'll drag a label. The label will tell us the name of the recipe. The UI image will be the image of the recipe. We'll have a UI text view. We haven't seen text views yet, right? But the UI text view has more functionality than a label, right? It's able to scroll if there's more text in that content area. And we'll have a button. Or we'll have 3 buttons, because we'll have 3 recipes for now. We'll have 3 buttons. So when the user selects a button, it shows them that particular recipe. So that's the UI for our application. That's the view of our application. That's what we're watching right now, and that's what we'll be creating. Everybody with me? So that's the V in the MVC. The C is our view controller, right? Which comes with Xcode here. We have a view controller. That's a default view controller. So we'll use that view controller to put the code that talks between the view and the controller there. So I click on a button, the controller updates the view. Everybody with me? I click on a button, I get a new image of a recipe. Where do I get the recipes from? Right? The where I get the recipes from is the question about my M. My M answers where I get the recipes from. The recipes will be a model, a recipe model, that has its properties. What does a recipe have? A name, an image, a description. So that will be the M of our MVC. The V is our controller. The view is what we're staring at now in the storyboard file. So let's get started. So first, let's get to the object library. To get to the object library, how do we get to the object library? What's the shortcut? Command-Shift-L, right? Command-Shift-L brings up the object library. And if you search for image, you'll get a UI image view. So Command-Shift-L, I search for image, and I get an image view. An image view is a content view. A content view allows you to have all the content in that view, right? A label is not a content view. A label is just text. But an image view allows us to have an image, UI image, inside that view, right? So here we have an image view. We drag the image view over to our scene, right? So you want to drag it. Drag it to the top until you get to that blue line, the blue layout line. Do we see the blue layout line? Right? And drag it to the leftmost area of the screen. So top, left. Right? Yes? Cool. So at this point, we could drag using the handles. We could drag using the handles all the way to the right area. So we'll go ahead and drag, expand the view, expand the image view by dragging, right? We could drag, so we're dragging all the way to the right until it snaps to the right edge of the screen. And we'll drag the bottom. That looks about right for now. And before we continue, let's do a couple things. Let's clean up a couple things. First off, your simulator, you should select your iPhone 11 Pro Max. I'm selecting that as my simulator. And if we go down to where it says View as iPhone, do we see View as iPhone at the bottom? I'll also select my iPhone 11 Pro Max. So make sure that's also selected, right? So View as iPhone 11 Pro Max. So for now, the two needs to be in sync, okay? It needs to be in sync because we haven't spoken about auto layout, right? When we speak about auto layout, then it doesn't matter what simulator you run it on, it should be laid out correctly. Now, if one is out of sync with the other, the layout will be not in sync. So far, so good? Next week, we'll start talking about auto layout and how to lay out your views dynamically so it doesn't matter what device you're running. Great, so we have a UI view, this is great. Go ahead and drag a label beneath the image view. So drag in a label, search for label in the object library, and drag a label beneath the image view and center it beneath the image view. So center it horizontally. So we're getting a label from the object library, we're dragging it in. I'm gonna center it somewhere here. That's good. We could give the label a default name. I'll call it recipe name. We need to center it again. I'll center it by picking it up, by dragging it. I'll also extend the right and the left label to make it longer. So I'll extend the right side all the way to my blue guideline here. I'll extend the left to my left guideline right here. And I'll also show you guys something else today. The bottom, I could also drag the bottom. So drag the bottom about twice the height of recipe name here. So about that is good. I need to align my recipe name. I'll align it center. To align it, I'll go to the attributes inspector. So I'll make sure that my label is selected. Make sure my label is selected. I'll go to the attributes inspector. If my inspector's window is closed like this, I'll open it by clicking on the top right button here. I'll click it so it's open. I'll make sure my attributes inspector is open. Right, my attributes inspector is open. It shows label, right? Make sure it shows label. That's the correct UI element you're editing. And here, do we see lines? Do we see where it says lines? Right? So that's the amount of line numbers. It defaults at 1, but we'll default it to 0. Why 0? We want if the description or the name is longer, it doesn't have an ellipse on the end. It basically grows with the size of my label, the height of my label. So whatever the text is, if it's longer than the width of the label, it grows. Everybody with me? So here I change lines to 0. Great. Right. So here we have our image view, we have our recipe name. Go ahead and where it says alignment, so let's go back to alignment here. Do we see alignment? Click on center, the second button on alignment here. That centers my label or the text in my label. Okay? So at this point, we have our image, we have our recipe name. Let's go ahead and add a text view. So open up the object library again and search for text view. Text view, right? So go to your object library and search for text view. Drag a text view over to your view. We'll use our blue layout guidelines. We could actually edge it out to the left and make sure it's at the bottom of our label here. Don't go outside or inside of our blue line, right? You want to go just where it touches that label here, like that. Go ahead and drag the right side to the right of the view. So the right side of my text view, drag it all the way to the right side of my view. Drag the bottom of the text view to about 3/4 the height of the device, right here. That's good. So again, the text view, when we run the app, we'll see that the text view is scrollable. So if the content is higher than my area for my text view, it enables the user to scroll, to see more content, right? So that's the text view there. The text view itself inherits from scroll view. So text view, UI text view, inherits from scroll view. Yesterday we saw button inherits from control. UI text view inherits from UI scroll view. UI scroll view is one of the most used, heavily used UI kit elements in iOS. It's everywhere. It's in collection views, which we'll see. It's in table views, which you use, right? If you could scroll it, it's from UI scroll view, okay? Great. So here we need to add 3 buttons. So let's go ahead and get a button. So we'll go to the object library. I'll search for a button. And you're getting the first button, not a bar button item. We'll get to that later. Just a plain button. So drag a button in. I will center my button here below. Actually go lower, like right close to the bottom of the phone until you get to the bottom blue guideline. So this is my button. I will call this button recipe. Recipe 2 for now. All right. So for now we have 1 button. We won't drag in another button because we have a button already. So very simply, we'll use option click to get a second button from that original button. So it copies that exact button for us. So go ahead and option click on our button, option click and drag. It drags out a second button. Great. And we align it with our first. Do the same for the third button and align it to the right side. We'll option click and we'll drag. We love dragging, right? At this point, we have 3 buttons. We could edit the text. So the first one will be recipe 1, second recipe 2, and third recipe 3. So you could double click and edit the text. So this one is recipe 1, recipe 2, and the third is recipe 3. Great. And we'll drag our text view. When you're done with the 3 buttons, drag your text view just so that it touches the blue line on the button. So drag the bottom of your text view such that it touches the blue line or the safe area line on our button. So at this point, we have laid out our view. So this is the view part of the MVC, the view. Great. We could actually run our app and test, right? So run your app by Command R. Command R runs your application. It builds and runs the application. And let's see what our view looks like. Make sure you're running on an iPhone 11 Pro Max if your view as is the same 11 Pro Max. My simulator is loading. And there, I don't have an image yet because there's no image yet, but I have my recipe name, shows recipe name. So the view is as we laid out. So far, so good? The view is as we laid out. We have 3 buttons at the bottom. We have a recipe name. At the top of the recipe name will be some image. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and connect our UI elements to our view controller. Remember, the view controller is the glue, right? So now the view controller is getting information from the view. We need to connect them. So now let's go ahead and get the assistant editor open. So I'll get access to the assistant editor by clicking right where it says editor options here, where my mouse is, right by the warning sign, that yellow warning sign here. Everybody sees that? So click on my editor options and click on assistant. So click on assistant. That brings up my view controller. I need more space, so I will close my inspectors column. I'll also close my navigator area. So at this point, I have my view and I have my view controller, right? I have my view to the left. I have my view controller to the right. What we need to do is create outlets. I need to create an outlet for my UI image, an outlet for my recipe name, an outlet for my text view, right? We do not need an outlet for the buttons, but we need an action, right? Like we did yesterday. Okay. So for now, you guys go ahead and start. Drag, connect the UI image to our view controller, and name that outlet recipe image. So recipe image, lowercase r, uppercase I. So you want to control drag from the UI image over to your view controller. And control drag just over where it says override function there. So just over override, that's where you want to have your outlets. So you want to have your outlets. You can make some space for your outlets. I could even put an outlets, one second. I could even put an outlets comment here. So outlets go here, right at 15. Question?
For the UI image view, the default is strong. Should I leave it as strong or change it to weak?
Yeah, leave it strong for now. Yeah.
Maybe there's
For now, everybody just leave it as weak. We'll talk about that later when we talk about memory management. So everybody make it weak. Make your outlets weak. So what are we doing? We control dragging the image view. We'll call it recipe name, lowercase r, uppercase I. Sorry. Sorry. Recipe name, uppercase N. Sorry. Recipe image is uppercase I. Okay? Recipe name, uppercase N, lowercase r. We're doing all 3. We're doing the recipe image, recipe name, recipe description. So control drag from UI image over to our outlets. For the connection, it is an outlet. Object is view controller, and our name is recipe image. And we're keeping it as weak. And we connect. All right. Next, we want to connect our recipe name label. We control drag from our recipe name over to our view controller, and the name is recipe name. So here we have recipe name. It's a label, it's weak, We connect. Could not insert outlet. What am I trying to drag here? Cancel. Yeah, got it. So here I want to do recipe name. Get some more space here. Great. Next, we want to do the text view. So the text view will call recipe description. So control drag from the text view over to your view controller. And I want to call it recipe description. Press enter. While we're here, let's make an action for the button. So for my button, I want to create an action. So I'll drag, control drag from my recipe one button, control drag, over to my view controller. This creates an action, not an outlet, an action. Let's zoom in here. So here I have a connection, it's an action. Object is view controller. The name of that action, I'll call it recipe changed. Recipe change. I'll change the type from any to UI button because the UI element is a UI button. I'll keep touch up inside as the default. Right? And I'll connect. Yes?
Why does the give you the option for any
Because it keeps it simple for the compiler. I mean, at some point, maybe they'll update it, but it could be any, and then you have to typecast it to what type you expect. Right? Very good. Yes?
What does the override view load?
So yesterday we spoke like view did load is the first entry point for the view controller. When the view controller first comes on screen, or our view first comes on screen, view did load gets called. So as we get deeper into development, we'll see if you have any startup code to do. That's where you want to do it.
Okay, so the outlet's always is always.
As far as like organizing your code, you want to have it before all your properties, before functions, as we did in Unit 1,
Yeah.
right? Always have your properties before your functions. Cool? So we're keeping the same principle here. Like, do not come at line 26 and create some variable or some outlet. Action, yes, but not an outlet. I will not create an outlet between methods. Yes?
Just one thing. For the recipe, they're all pretty much going to do the same thing, right? So is it possible?
Yes, we get into that point, which we did yesterday. We'll be dragging all the buttons to that same function. We're not writing individual methods for it. Yes, because they are doing the same thing. Cool? But we have to connect those buttons. Very good. So we connected button number 1. So as Tiffany says, now we could just go ahead and connect button number 2, button number 3. Now, as we did yesterday, you could go from view controller to button. So I want to drag from where I'm at on line 27, where I have that circle here with the plus sign. Just go ahead and drag, not control drag, just drag. Click down and drag over to recipe 2. Right? What are we doing? We click down at line 27, where we have that circle icon. Do we see the circle icon? I click down on it, and I drag over to recipe 2. Yes. And how do I verify what buttons are currently connected? By hovering over the circle. Currently, recipe 3 is not connected. Everybody sees that. If for some reason, pay attention here, if for some reason I want to disconnect recipe 2, right? Couple ways we could do it. One way we could do it is right-click on the button or element you want to disconnect. Everybody? If I want to disconnect recipe 2, I right-click on recipe 2. I right-click on recipe 2, and let me zoom in here. And I scroll down to where it says touch up inside. Do we see touch up inside here? And do we see the connection button or the X button there? That disconnects it. So if I click on that X icon, I disconnect that particular action from the button. Okay? To disconnect, we do not delete. If you delete the button, it's still connected. You run your application, it will crash. We'll do it, right? We'll do it. We'll get there. We'll do it. We'll see the crash. The crash will be responder selector not found. If you want to change, delete, do whatever, you want to disconnect. Everybody with me? Disconnect, then delete. If you delete, if you delete and you do not disconnect, then your app will crash because Xcode still sees the connection. It doesn't see the button when you run. Everybody with me? Okay, so here if you want to disconnect, you simply click on the X button here. Let's zoom back out. And at this point, if I hover over, I only have one button selected. Do we see that? A next way we could disconnect is using the connection inspector. Let's open up our inspector column and go to connections. Connections is to the right of the attributes inspector. Let's zoom in. Do we see our attributes inspector? Do we see the icon for our attributes inspector? That down arrow, do we see that? To the right of it, we have a size inspector. Right? The size inspector, you could size to a specific size an element. Like if I have a button, I could come to the size inspector and say, button, I want you to be 200 by 100. You come here and you could change your button down here where it says width and height. So far, so good? But if you want to see connections for an element, you click on Connections Inspector, which is the last icon in the inspector's window. Okay? I click on the Connections Inspector. I zoom back. I click on the connections I want. If in case recipe 1, I click on recipe 1, which is still connected. It shows me all the connections that recipe 1 has. Right? Do we see touch up inside for connection 1? So I could also disconnect here. Basically, when the user touches the button inside of the frame, it activates my function. Right? So that's the trigger there. That's the target action for the button. By default, that's what we get. Rarely you want to change it to something else, like touch up outside or touch drag inside, right? Touch drag inside is if the user is doing a drag action, then you could capture that for your action. But our action simply says, when the user touches my button, trigger my action. Cool? Yes?
And what's the other way of disconnecting apart from home?
Right click on the button,
Right.
shows the connections it has, or the connections inspector, which is where we went to.
I felt like it was another way, which was like just drag it, you could like drag it off or something like that.
No, dragging it off, no. Those are the two ways, right? You right click on the button that you want to disconnect, you right click on it, you uncheck it, or you use the connections inspector. Okay? All right, cool. So now let's reconnect everything that we had. I saw a hand up. Yes, sir.
What if you deleted the button? How can you still see other connections?
If you deleted the button, then you want to go back to the connections inspector. You deleted the button altogether. Is that?
I'm on the side.
If you delete the button altogether, then you have to see what the action is, and then go to that action and see what connections it might have by going back to the connections inspector. Right? Cool? All right.
All of those in that area are disconnected.
Which area? The column
Like,
area?
you have, like,
This.
all attributes inspector.
Yeah, all those are inspectors to inspect some element, whether it be size inspector, connections inspector, attributes inspector, identity inspector.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Do the connections still appear even if you deleted both the button and the function, the action function?
No, it won't appear. Okay. And also, if you're trying to rename a function, really refactor the function. Don't just change the name. So that's one thing I'll show you before we keep going. If you want to change recipe change to a different name, please, 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 right-click on recipe name, go to refactor, and rename. Do not rename it manually. Okay? Everybody? Do not rename IB functions manually. As a matter of fact, any function. it's going to also break the connection because you manually changed it, but Xcode itself doesn't know that you renamed it, and the outlet will look for that name, and you'll get a crash. Anything you're changing, use refactor. Any name you're changing, both functions and outlet, yes. Because we'll get those crashes anyway, because we just started as iOS developers, we'll get those crashes. But to avoid those crashes, anything you're renaming, any connection you want to delete, if you want to delete, disconnect first. If you want to rename, use refactor, okay? Right click and use refactor if you want to rename. Do not rename manually. All right, that's good. Good. So let's connect all our buttons. So now I will drag over from my IB action view controller over to recipe 2. I'll drag over from my IB action over to recipe 3. And at this point, it's connected. It's good to test, right? So at this point, we'll just test, write in a print function here, and say button pressed. Make sure all our buttons are working. So go ahead and run your application again, and make sure each button that you press, your console log does come up saying button pressed. So as I said, it's good to test your code as you go. So go ahead and Command R, run your application. So I click on recipe 1, button press comes up. Let me take that away here. I click on recipe 2, button press comes up. I click on recipe 3. Let me clear that out to make sure that we are seeing it. Right, button press comes up. So far, so good? Yes. Make sure that make sure your view is open. Is your view and your view controller both on screen? Chelsea? All you want to do is hover over, like we did. Hover over and make sure all 3 are highlighted. When you pass over the dot, that circle there. When you click on recipe 2, what happens? Put a breakpoint. So that's where breakpoint comes in, right? So you could put a breakpoint at line 28. Chelsea? You could put a breakpoint at line 28 in the function. Put a breakpoint and run your application again. The print should work anyway, but put a breakpoint. And when you click on that button, it should activate the breakpoint. Okay, cool. All right, so we saw the M. Well, we haven't seen the M. We saw the controller. We saw the C part of it. We saw the view. We just edited our view. Now let's go see what the model is. So create a new file. This is the first time we're creating a new file in iOS development. We've created new files before in Unit 1, but yesterday we did not create a new file. So today we're creating a new file. Name the file recipe, and it's going to be a struct. So your struct is also called recipe. Okay, so go ahead and create a new file. It's a Swift file. New file, Swift file. The file name is recipe. It's a struct, name recipe. And for now, you could go ahead and close your assistant window, open your navigation area, and we want to create a new file. So to create a new file, you could simply Command N, and we said we're creating a Swift file, right? So Swift file, click Next. And for the save as file name, we are saying recipe. Right, recipe. It's an uppercase R, it's not lowercase r. It's a type. Make sure targets is selected for recipes and click on create. Let's navigate over to our recipes file. And we said we're creating a struct. So make sure that you in your recipes that Swift file. So you created the file, you navigate to the file. Yes, sir. I was gonna let that come in later, but actually keep it like that for now. We'll answer your question very shortly, okay? Okay, cool. So we're creating a struct. It's called recipe. In our recipe, we have some properties. Pretty soon, we will go over to the lesson and we'll grab the data that we have. We have an array of recipes. We'll grab that later because we're not going to type in that array of recipes. That's just like data entry. But for now, let's create the recipes properties. We'll start out with a name. The name of the recipe is a string. We have number of servants. Number of servants is an integer. We created a recipe struct file. So create new file and name it recipe, uppercase R. And yeah, within the project, yeah. And we're going through the properties now. So next we have ingredients. And ingredients is a dictionary where the key is a string and the value is a string. We have the duration time of the recipe, or the cooking time rather, of the recipe, which is an integer. We have a list of equipment to use. And that is an array of strings. So here we have cooking time. Yeah, exactly. Cooking time. Directions are coming. Next up, we have the temperature. Don't burn my turkey. And here it's a double serving procedure. And this is a string, makes sense. Review, is it the best recipe ever? We have an image of type UI image, right? We've seen UI image. Well, we saw UI image yesterday somewhat with our button. But now, use of undeclared type UI image. Why is this not working? What's that? Right? Everybody sees that? We have UI image in there. UI kit is not part of foundation. So we have import foundation here. Foundation has our arrays, our dictionaries, our strings, all those types, our Boolean values, right? But foundation, the foundation framework does not have UI kit elements. Foundation does not have UI image. Everybody with me? So when we say import something, the import something we're talking about, get me all the classes for that particular framework. Foundation does not have UI image. So we need to get access to UI image. UI image is part of UI kit. So here we need to change foundation to UI kit in order to have access to UI image. Yes, sir? You can, but in that case, UI kit has foundation arrays already, so that's like double work for the compiler. So in that case, just UI kit is enough. Cool? Very good question. So here, just simply change foundation to UI kit. Right? So this is like the second Apple framework we've been seeing. First was foundation. Yes? Change foundation to UI kit. One has a subset of the other. UI kit has a subset of foundation. So we also have access to arrays. Right? So here we have UI image, that's working now, this is great. So as we delve more into iOS development, we'll see more frameworks, right? We'll come across AV Foundation. That should be exciting for our audio engineers and our drummers and musicians, right? We have SpriteKit if you want to make games. We have all those frameworks. As a matter of fact, let's tangent over to our foundation, all our frameworks we have. So Apple Developer Frameworks. I think I slugged that out yesterday. Did I slug this out yesterday? Right? So here we have UIKit we spoke about yesterday, and those are the basic app frameworks. But as we go deeper in, we have ARKit, right? That capsule projects. It's up to you at some point, like, hey, you come together as a team. Oh, we want to build an ARKit app. Okay, let's go learn ARKit. And at that point, you have enough of experience to pick up any framework you want and delve deeper into it. We'll talk about core graphics a little bit, core animation, when you want to do animations there. That's on the graphics and games. If you're a heavy gamer, at some point in Unit 3, you could start looking at your own frameworks outside of curriculum. The minute you start looking outside of curriculum, that's where you really start appreciating iOS development and what you could create. Because at the end of the day, you're a builder. Builders like to build their own thing. They don't like to be told all the time like what to build. Oh, go build this. Go bake that bread. No. I want to experiment with my own bread, right? I want to make my own bread. Don't tell me what bread to make, right? So SceneKit, right? We have Metal, all that. That's heavy game. You're a heavy gamer. That's where you want to be looking. In graphics and games, that's the frameworks we have. App services. You're into fitness. Maybe you want to create a fitness app. HealthKit. Import HealthKit, right? Then you get a whole bunch of stuff for free from Apple. HomeKit, you're into like hardware. You want to create the best HomePod ever. I mean, you could go as far as Apple lets you, right? Because there's some points where Apple is not going to open up the whole API for you, right? So some things are private. You don't have access to it. But everything that's public is here. On that page, everything that's public is here. You want music, you want to go to AV Foundation. We up top, did we miss it yet? We come into it. We get into it. So app services, we have MapKit, right? You're looking around for directions. We're talking about MapKit in core curriculum. We're talking about MapKit. I think Unit 4, we're talking about MapKit. Messages, you want to create a chat app. Message UI, you want to have a game where you have multi-tier connectivity, right? Christian and Cassandra wants to play a game between themselves with Bluetooth, right? You could look at called Bluetooth. Moving down, we talk about core data. That's a core curriculum thing there. Core location, we talk about that. Core ML, if you're into like machine learning or you're curious about machine learning, that's what you want to look at, Core ML. Media, that's you, sir, Mr. Christian. You have AV Foundation here. You have Audio Kit, Audio Toolbox, AV Kit, Core Audio, right? All that audio framework there at your disposal. So what you do, you go in there, you use tutorials, you watch videos. By the time you know it, you have that concept you want to build, you build the thing. You want to do live audio video streaming, HTTP live streaming. That's the framework. Anything you want to build, there's a framework for it almost, right? All right, so that's like a crash course on, and again, make sure you bookmark this one, because everything you learn, every time you learn something new, you want to see like what framework you could start using, how comfortable are you with looking at frameworks. So those are the frameworks. And today we continue talking about UIKit. And SwiftUI is also here. All right, great. So we have our image. We solved our UIKit issue. We changed foundation to UIKit. And UI image is happy now. It works, great. So now we have nutritional value of the recipe. Nutritional value. And this is a string. And lastly, we have directions. Give me directions of how to make this thing. And that is an array of strings. At this point, build, Command B, make sure you have no errors. Great. So those are our properties for the recipe. And here we will have one type method to return us an array of recipes. How does the type method work? Does it work? How does the type method work? How do we call a type method? Recipe.type method. Very good. Everybody with that, right? Amini says we call a type method using the type. In that case, our type name is recipe, right? So here we'll have a type method that we'll grab from the lesson, and we'll be accessing it. It returns us an array of recipes. We'll be accessing it by recipe.getRecipes, and it returns us an array of recipes. Very similar to the card game we had, the blackjack, right? We said card.getCards. Or what do we have? New game, whatever it was, right? We used the type on that method there. Okay, so let's navigate to the lesson. Let's navigate over to the lesson. Do we have all the properties typed out? Get an array of recipes. Yeah, we won't type it out. That's just data entry there at this point. But most likely, any app you create, like whether it be JSON or whatever, you're not creating the data on the fly. You have like an API to query, or you have a given set of data, or your user is generating your own data. I mean, we could create this app where we're creating our own recipe, but we haven't gotten to that point in the curriculum yet, right? But we need data. We need data for our app, and we'll get the data from the lesson. Let us know. Can we continue? Okay, so navigate to the lesson. Navigate to the lesson. Navigate to the lesson. We are looking for where it says completed model. Do we see completed model? Do we see completed model right beneath? What's the header? Creating an app for MVC. Do we see that? So scroll down to where it says create the model. We've done our properties. Do we see completed model? Do we see completed model? Click on it. It expands what the model looks like. We've created the properties. Where it says methods here, this is the type method that we need. That type method is called getRecipes. It returns us an array of recipes, okay? It returns us an array of recipes. The arrays of recipes have been created using an initializer here, right? It tells us the name of the recipe, the ingredients of the recipe, the duration time of the recipe, the equipment used for that recipe, temperature, and all the properties that we have. So far, so good? All right, so let's go ahead and grab that. So let's get the static. Let's grab static all the way from static down to our, not the last curly, but the curly right before the last one. So copy that. We don't normally copy and paste, but this code, we're not going to type this out. So copy that code out. And let's navigate back to our model. Let's navigate back to our model. My model is recipe. Right below my comment, I will paste in my getRecipes method. I'll build my application because maybe I forgot a curly bracket. Maybe I forgot something. Either way, I need to build. Maybe my property's name is not named correctly. If I have name or lowercase, it's looking for name or lowercase, right? So at this point, make sure we build and make sure we have no errors. If we have errors, we need to fix them. So far, so good? We're all good, right? Margaret, you good? Errors? No errors? We good? Tiffany? Mel? Mel?
Oh, the only error I had is that you put cooking time, what duration, I put cooking time.
Stop us if you have any errors. What's your error? Verify that your properties are what we have on screen. Tanya? On screen. Is it? And it's working now? Okay, let's slack out the recipes so we could continue here. I will slack out the recipes, the completed model we have. So oh, for you? Okay. So let me run this, and this is our recipe. This is our recipe model, right? Okay, so I slacked it out. Great. Anybody else still having issues with the model? Okay, so build, this works. Next up, how many recipes we have? We have deviled eggs, perfect roast chicken. All right, I'll just slack out. Let me get I'll get the images for us. I'll slack out the images so we don't have to download them all together. I'll slack it out and get us started there because we need images for our UI to work correctly. So documents, assets, no, not this. Documents, assets, I'll zip this and I will slack it out. Computer, documents, assets, documents. Documents, assets, and my zip file is coming over to you. Recipe assets. So recipe assets is coming over right now. Processing. Done. Wow. Good Wi-Fi today. I know it's only 1 meg, but sometimes it takes forever. All right, so you have the zip file. Go ahead and download it. And we know how to import images into our assets folder. So let's go ahead and do that. So I want to navigate to my assets folder. So click on the assets folder. Unzip the assets file. I slacked out the assets folder, the recipe image, right? So uncompress it. No, almost. A Bruce Lee moment. Uncompress it and import all the images into your assets. Everybody with me? Is it downloading? Is it done? Is it taking a while? Tiffany, in Slack, I've slacked out the zip file of all the recipe images. Double click on it, it's going to uncompress your file. We can't just drag in the zip file. We have to double click on uncompress the.
Once we have it, then we go to assets.
Yes, exactly.
And import from that folder.
You could also just drag in. You could also drag in manually a file or an image into your assets folder. Just drag all of them. There's like what, 8 or 10? Okay, so how are we doing with the import? Did we import our images? Okay, so let me do mine then. I guess I'm behind. I go to import. I navigate to where my images are. I select all the images. They're what? They're making you hungry? Yes, we should probably just eat the images. All right. So we have our images, right? Yes? All right, perfect. What is this guy doing? Okay, cool. So we have our images, build, make sure everything still works. So Command B, build, and navigate back to the view controller. Navigate back to the view controller when you're done. Yes.
How come, when we down, when we put the images, right, it says 1 times 2 times?
We'll talk about the what that means later. Okay? It's for different size screens, but we'll talk about the aspect ratio and everything later.
Oh, that's like on the iPad, like.
iPad versus iPhone 11 Pro Max versus a non-retina, right? Okay, so let us navigate to view controller. We have one more method to write. So here we're writing a method or a function called update recipe at index. So here we have a function called update. We're in the view controller. We're in the view controller. I'm writing a method called update recipe at index. All right? Update recipe at index. For now, we have 3 buttons, right? We have 3 buttons. We should also give that a tag at some point. We'll come to it. But here, when we click one of our buttons, it should respond and get, oh, we need an array as well. Let's create our array, actually. So here we have our function called update recipe at index. Let's navigate up and create an array of recipes. How can we work with data? We have no data. So let's get our data. So navigate up right below our outlets here. I'll put in a comment. I'll call it recipe data. Again, our app needs data to work. So here I'll write recipes. Again, it's plural. Recipes imply many recipes. How do we access our get recipes method? Call it by its name. That's good. There's more information there though. What else? How do we access recipes? In our model, we have a method called get recipes. How do we access that?
Oh, recipe dot the function. So,
Very good. So recipe, so Tiffany's saying recipe dot get recipes, right? Right? And get recipes, what does it return? An array of recipes. Very good. So here we have recipe.getRecipes. Before we even move on, let's test if we do have recipes indeed. So in our viewDidLoad, it's a good place to test that. viewDidLoad is that method that gets called the first time our screen comes up, right? We run our application, that first screen we see, viewDidLoad gets called. viewDidLoad says, hey, now I'm on screen, do whatever you want to do. In our case, I just want to simply say, how many recipes do I have? Right? So we'll write a simple print statement to say, there are X amount of recipes. So here we have recipes, well, yeah, recipes, right? And we're using string interpolation. We'll say recipes. How do I find out how many recipes I have? That count, very good. So at this point, I run my application. And look, there are 3 recipes got printed out in the console, right? Which is valid, which is validated, right? Because we saw in our model that we had 3 elements in the array. So we should have 3 recipes, correct? While we're here, let's also see what a breakpoint is. We saw it yesterday, but let's still see what breakpoints are useful for. So put a breakpoint at line 23. Click line 23 if line 23 is your print statement. Click on it. Run the app again. Run the app again. Wow, it's already 12:50. So run the app again. It stopped. The app did not crash. It stopped at my breakpoint. Everybody with me? It stopped at line 23. Now I could go ahead and investigate any properties that I need to. Let's get to the debug area. Make your debug area bigger by dragging it. We could drag our debug area, right? We could make it bigger. To the right of our debug area, we have the variables. Our variables, our environment variables are to the right, are to the left. To the left here, where it says self, to the left, we have our environment variables. It says self. If I click on self, right, let's look closely what we have here. We see recipes. Do we see recipes? So this is self. Self is the instance of the view controller. The only thing we're interested in now is the recipes. If I see recipes, I could click on recipes. Look, I got 3 elements. If we click on the elements, we see what they are. So it enables us to investigate more into our variable. What does our variable have? Right? I don't have to like print a statement, go through some for loop to see what my elements are. I'm just interested in what my elements for my recipe is. So I use a breakpoint. It stops at the breakpoint. And now I could further look into any variable that I want at that particular instance. So here I could click on 0, and look at that. I also see the name, ingredients, all that stuff. Let's see more here. Let me zoom out. Right. If I click on image, I could also see an image of that particular deviled eggs. So click on image, expand the recipe. Expand the recipe, everybody. We expanded recipes, right? Go down to where it says image. Let me zoom in here. Do we see image? Click on image, and there's an eyeball all of a sudden looking at you. There's an eyeball all the way at the bottom. Do we see the eyeball? Do we see that eyeball here? Click on the eyeball, and look, we could see what image is at index 0. Right? Xcode is amazing. Cool? So if for some reason you run your project, your image is not showing up, you could put a breakpoint. Why isn't my image showing up? Investigate what the image property looks like. If you do see an image, then something else is wrong. You keep investigating. Breakpoints enable us to investigate. And investigate the crime scene. In that case, the code scene. What's going on? How did I get to the eyeball? So let's go. Let me close this out. So click on image, right? And go to the very bottom of Xcode. The very, very bottom of Xcode. So make sure you click on image.
That's image within
Element 0. I closed I closed, right? So recipes, close that, open, go down to image here. And then the eyeball comes up. You see the eyeball at the very bottom? The very bottom of Xcode. Let me zoom in here. Make sure you highlight image. Is your image highlighted? Go to the very bottom where my mouse is. You will see an eyeball. Click on the eyeball. Yeah, cool. All right, great. So let's keep going here. 7 minutes. Okay, cool. So let's keep going, We tested, we have data, that's good. Let's go back and write our function. Update recipe at index takes in some integer. It takes in some integer. So we'll say index here is of some type int. Great. We'll create a constant called recipe. We need one recipe. We need that particular recipe. Whichever tag, we need to update our tags. So the first recipe button would be 0, second recipe button would be 1, third would be 2. So far, so good? We haven't done that, but you feel free to do it. But let's continue. Yes, sir. Okay, you did it very good, very good. All right, so here we need to access one recipe. How do we access one recipe? Well, we need to get access to the array. We access the array. We index into the array using subscripted. So I subscript and I say index. Index is, it could be 0, it could be 1, it could be 2. So far, so good. So index, the value of index could be value of index, example, 0. We could have 1, or we could have 2. Why can we have 0, 1, 2? That would come from the tag. So 0, 1, 2, so tags, button, recipe button tags, recipe button tags will be 0, 1, and 2. Cool? So we have 3 buttons, right? In our UI, we have 3 buttons, correct? So we need to update the tags on that. And every view has a tag, so we're able to do that. As of yesterday, we saw that, what that looks like. Cool. So here we have a recipe. At this point, if you option click on recipe, it should be of type recipe, which it is. It's of type recipe. Great. So we have a recipe. Let's keep going. If we have a recipe, we could update our elements. So update UI elements using the current recipe instance above. So here we want to update our elements. The first element we'll update, we'll say recipe image. UI image has a property on it called image, right? Remember, UI image is a content view, right? There's no use in a UI image view if it doesn't have an image. So let's set the image on it, right? Setting the image on it is accessing the image property. That image takes in a UI image. So on my, this is an image view, by the way. We should probably have renamed it to recipe image view to make it more readable there. But recipe image dot image, right? That image expects an image. Everybody with me? So here I have an image. Where do I get the image from? How can I get an image? That's one way. But what do I have at line 32 that has an image on it? Recipe. Could I say recipe.image? Right? Let's go back to our model. Let's go back to our model. Go back to recipe. The properties that we created earlier. We created an image. What type is this? Image. We set it here. Look at where we set it. Can I close this a little bit? Anyway, look at where we set it. So here I'm saying image. Look at that. I said image. I set image to UI image on line 33. Do we see line 33? I set image to a UI image from the assets folder. That image here, UI image, is coming from the assets folder, right? So now my image has a value. So I could say recipe.image, get me the image. We saw that value. When we debugged and we clicked on image, we saw the image because it has a value already, right? At that point, it has a value. All right, let's continue. This is good. Go back to recipe. So I could simply say recipe.image, like that, right? I could give it a name. What element has the name? Name. So recipe.name, right? Recipe name. What is recipe name? What element is recipe name? What type of element? UI element. Look up. We dragged from our view over to our view controller. What element did we drag and call recipe name? UI label. Recipe name is a UI label. How can we set a UI label with a string? How can we set? What property do we need to get to on the UI label? Dot text. Very good. So here I'll say dot text equal to recipe dot name. Right? That's valid. For use of time, we won't get into the description. I'll post the results of the description for us. But for now, let's make our buttons work. So the buttons will change the image and change the name. Everybody with me? The description, I'll post the finished code on that one. But let's make all the buttons work. Okay? So let's go to our storyboard. So go to your storyboard and update the tags. All the tags currently, what's the default tags? What's the values?
0.
They're all 0, right? According to Tiffany, all the tags are 0. That doesn't help us. We want to differentiate that. So start off with keeping the first one at 0, change the second button to 1, change the third button to what? 2. Very good. So it follows our array, everything is in sync. So for 2, I want to go to my attributes inspector, navigate down to my view area, and change my tag from 0 to 1. Right? Everybody? So now my view tag is 1 for my second button. Go ahead and do the third button. Do the third button. Third button should be 2. Go ahead and update tag to 2. For recipe 3 here. So recipe 3, I click on it. I navigate to my attributes inspector where it says tag here. I update tag to 2. Right? Attributes inspector. Right? Attributes inspector. Make sure it says recipe 3 here. And you navigate down and change tag to 2. At this point, we have updated our tags. At this point, we have updated our tags. Let's go back to our view controller. Go back to our view controller. And as our view uploads, as our view updates, the view did load gets called, we want to set. Let's go ahead and run the app, actually. Run the app and see what's happening. So let's run our application. Currently, we have no recipes on screen, right? That's not good. We want to have some sort of recipe here. So we'll default to the first recipe when the app launches. Let's do that in view did load. That's why we said view did load, you want to have some startup code in view did load. That's where you put it. You want to have something start up, you do it in view did load, right? So we could remove our print statement. We don't need it now. And here, I will call my update recipe at index. What value should we pass in if we want it to be the first value, the first recipe? 0. Thank you, sir. So I'll pass in 0. I'll run my app again. And look, wow, I got my devil eggs to come up on screen. Right? If I click on recipe 2, nothing happens. We need to investigate what's going on there. Recipe 3, nothing happens. Let's see what's happening. Look, button press. We never did any code there. Right? Everybody? Our recipe changed. We're not doing any logic to update the recipe. So let's go ahead and update that. Yes? Sizing errors will come up and help you. Cool? Antonio. Okay, so here we need to update our recipe changed method. Let's go ahead and do that. So in our recipe change, what do we need to do? What logic we need to write here?
Call the tag name.
Call the tag names.
Like tag. Well, one you have time with the variable tag.
We have sender. We should really rename this. By the way, sender here, you could rename sender to whatever you want. I could rename sender to button. Right? I could rename this to whatever I want. Let's go ahead and refactor sender name. I could refactor the sender here, rename it to like recipe button, for example. Press enter. Build and make sure you have no errors. Right? Run and also make sure you have no errors before we move on. So here we've refactored the recipe name label. Everybody with me? It was called sender. We refactored it to recipe button. So far, so good. Every view has a tag. We said that yesterday. Every view has a tag. We just changed the tags, right? So now I want to write some sort of logic to update my recipe view. What am I writing? A switch statement. What would the switch statement do? So it would switch the tag. On tag 0, it would do update recipe index for 1, right? So that's good. You could do that, right? But we catch ourselves. We'll be doing the same code everywhere. Switch 0, I'll be saying access element 1. Switch to case 2, I'll say access element 2. So to do that, we could simply say, using what you said, we could simply call our update recipes, right? What does this expect? What does update recipe at index expect? An integer, right? What is tag? An integer. Could we say recipe button.tag?
Yeah, but we would have to specify which tag.
It knows it's tag.
It knows each one.
If I click on button 3, what tag is that? What comes? No. No. What tag is 3?
Sorry, 2.
2. So what gets replaced there? 2, right? So let's give that a shot, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Very good. So here I will simply say recipe button dot tag, run the app again. So here my app is running. I want to change recipe. I don't want eggs anymore. I click on recipe 2. Boom, look at that. I got the perfect roast chicken. Does recipe 3 work? Boom, I got French toast, right? So that works. As I said, the description part, I'll just put it up when I post the final version of this. It's just going through the description and creating the description. I'll just add that. It's in the notes if you want. It's in the lesson. So that last part is in the lesson. But at this point, it's 1:10. We should stop here. Any questions? So let's review what we did today. We created an MVC application. The M, what's the M? The model. What's the model of the application? The data. The data for our recipes is recipe. We created a model called recipe. In the recipe, we have a method that returns us recipes. So that's the model of our application. What's the view of our application? UI view is the view. The view we're watching right now is the view. We created the view in Storyboard. We went to Storyboard and we laid out our view. We went to Storyboard here and we laid out our view. We laid out the view here, right? So that's the V in MVC. What's the C in MVC? What's the C? The controller. In that part, in our example, it's the view controller. We went to the view controller. We created all the logic needed for our view to talk to the data. For our controller to talk to the data and update the view. The view don't talk to data. View does not talk to data, okay? Never do that. Never put data logic in your view, right? The view is a dumb view. That's all it does. It presents. User touches something, the controller is the one taking charge. The controller is the glue between the view and the model. Everybody with me? Right? It's a controller. It controls both aspects there. So we saw the controller, we saw the model, right? We've seen MVC at its base, as the foundation of programming here. And as I said, there's many other architectures. If you go work for a bank, you'll see a different architecture. They're probably using Viper or something else. A lot of companies tend to use MVVM as well. But foundationally, you need to know MVC as an iOS developer. Everybody with me? Very good. So here we'll stop for today, and I'll post the lecture. Thank you.